end of the webinar, you'll receive a link to the webinar so you can forward it to your peers and colleagues. Again, this is All Hazards Consortium's webinar entitled Multi-State Fleet Response Working Group, New York City OEM Post-Sandy Experiences. I'd like to thank New York City Office of Emergency Management for working with us to provide this information to all of you. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Tom Moran, the Executive Director of the All Hazards Consortium. Tom?
Hi, thank you, Laura. Let me welcome everyone to our webinar. I especially want to thank our speakers, Dina Maniotis and Ira Tenenbaum from New York City. There are many others involved, certainly, but we wanted to thank New York City for taking the time, as well as all of you. Last month, Dina and myself and some folks in New Jersey were in Seattle talking about the post-Sandy experiences, lessons learned, innovations, and so forth. And we wanted to organize a webinar around capturing some of this so that we can use for future planning and education efforts of regulators, if you will, private sector owner-operators, academic research, nonprofits, and so forth. What you're going to hear is mind-blowing. I sat, as Dina was going through this in New York, in Seattle, I was just overwhelmed at how so many people are involved and so quickly people have to scale up to respond. And of course, New York City's been at this a long time. Ira's been working with the private sector for quite a while, and it's just, I think you'll find this not only interesting, but fascinating as far as what you might take from this or your organizations to learn from their experiences. So with that, I just want to introduce our speakers. I'm not sure who's going first, but I want to thank you again, Ira and Dina, for taking the time to present. So Ira, you're first on the list, so I guess you're going to go first?
Yes.
Ira is actually our primary speaker, Tom, for today.
And okay. Very good. Thank you.
And as Dina noted to some folks before, and first of all, thank you very much for having us and giving us the opportunity to share some of our experiences with the group. Dina and I spent a lot of time in the EOC and active, before, during, and after Sandy, and certainly while you're in the midst of an event, as everyone on the phone knows, you sort of do what has to be done, and you make it work. And then only afterwards do you really take a look back and say, I wonder where that came from. We are, of course, I should note that New York City is in the midst of its worst heat wave since 2008, and we have activated our on-call team, which Dina is a critical member, and we have more than 400 cooling centers open in the city. So Dina is going to be in and out of the call, supporting it where possible, and hopefully she'll be here for the Q&A session at least to give some feedback. With that, I wanted to just give a little bit of perspective before the storm to set the stage. I know many of you are on the call already know a lot of this, but just to remind everyone, if you could go to the again, the first slide right here, the dramatic picture of Lower Manhattan after the power outage with the bright lights of one World Financial Center, One World Trade Center actually rising there, and Battery Park City with power. It was quite it was one thing after another, and certainly we'll talk a little bit about the cascading impacts across the city. If you go to the next slide, please. So just a little bit to sort of summarize New York City in a single slide. There's a lot going on here on any given day, and the important thing I think that bears reminding is that typically when people think of storm surge or a hurricane coming in, there's a lot of attention that's paid towards the coastal areas, and those areas certainly got walloped with Hurricane Sandy and Superstorm Sandy, but the entire city was impacted in some way or another for an extended period of time. Whether even folks who had power, transportation disruptions, the connectivity, the old story of the ankles connected to the leg, and the legs connected to the knee, and the knees connected to the hip, etc. All works all the way through for a city the magnitude of New York, and areas that weren't devastated were actively involved in supporting the recovery throughout the event. So everything in the city, everywhere in the city, we had shelters open. We had people who were transported and displaced from their coastal area, their coastal homes or nursing homes and hospitals, moved further into the city. So it was a full city event. If you could go to the next slide. So a little bit about who we are, OEM. Our key mission but we make sure that everyone understands what their responsibilities are when it comes to the big city, the big picture for the city and the coastal storm plan overall. We are a coordinating body, and that leads right into the second part, which is we coordinate the response and recovery. We make sure everyone's at the table to share information, pull information together, paint a picture for our executives, for agency executives, and for City Hall, so that they can make the decisions that are necessary, that are going to guide the city. We collect and disseminate information in the bottom right over there. We are data hounds. We want to pull as much information together as possible and use it to inform those decisions and inform the actions that we take. We'll talk a little bit about how that came together in advance of the storm, but certainly that was a critical part in not only in the post-storm recovery and post-storm actions to make sure that everyone had the information they needed throughout the event. What you see there in that bottom right is a screenshot from a couple years ago. We had a 2010 tornado that tore through parts of Staten Island, Brooklyn, and Queens, and the little blue dots there are reports of tree damage or trees down that were called into our 311 system. We grabbed that data within a couple of hours, and we're able to use through GIS, put it on a overlay, and be able to really guide the response and let people know where we need to focus instead of just sort of anecdotal feelings. We had some hard data to guide that response. That's important to us. When everything that we do, we really look for ways to collect that data and use that data to inform our decisions. And of course, on the bottom left, educating the public and informing the public about how they can prepare for emergencies before and what they can do after. And all that is to do all that, we leverage our SIMS, our Citywide Incident Management System, that really is the backbone to everything that all of our agencies respond with. It gives us a single system under which we can all operate and integrate our resources. If you go to the next slide, please. So, I love putting this slide up for dramatic effect, because I think when we all see the information that comes out of the National Weather Service, and everyone's watching storms far out. You see those cones of the cones of probability and all sorts of modeling that goes on, and all that can change in pretty quickly. On the left there, just speaks for itself. The models, those noodle models, the spaghetti models, all pointing out to the ocean, except for that one really frustratingly annoying European model that seems right there going up towards Pennsylvania, the light green, and really, most people who've taken statistics in the past would probably think of it as an outlier. You will go looking more towards what's going on in the middle, and then a few days later, so definitely something to be paying attention to, but not something that's an imminent threat. And of course, just like a couple of days later, you see what's on the right. All those models turn in and face towards the East Coast in a dramatic fashion. And so not only were we looking at a storm now that was going to be more significant, it actually was more like the feature of our worst case scenario, which, unlike Irene, which came up the coast and sort of skirted us, was a direct impact over Atlantic City, New Jersey, and that for us is a worst case. So I just wanted to, again, paint that picture, let people know what we were looking at. And the reason we keep on preparing, and the reason we make sure our plans are up to speed, is so that in the span of 2 days, and all that changes, we're able to turn on a lot of what we had ready to go and the relationships that we've built and the time we've spent investing in building those relationships with the private sector and with the other agencies. We need less and less lead time. Of course, we want as much lead time as possible, but we have to accept the fact that sometimes it's not going to happen. If you go to the next slide, again, not to be too dramatic, but the reality is that when we look at storms now here in New York City, we're taking a new approach because historically we really looked at the category of storm, right? The category 1, 2, 3, or 4 that gave us an idea of what areas we needed to evacuate, zones A, B, or C, and we based pretty much a lot of our decisions on simply the category. And what we've learned working with the National Weather Service and the Hurricane Center and some of our experts here, we've seen, bear truth is the fact that, of course, we know now that the direction of the storm is as important as the category strength of the storm. So a Category 1 storm like Irene, north-northeast, coming up the coast, pretty much brings about 6 feet of surge, which anyone who was here during Irene in the area, really saw a little bit of flooding here and there, but it wasn't as bad as people thought it could be. And then, of course, the Category 1 storm, as it was billed for a while, Sandy, comes in with that different west-northwest direction, coming straight, inland with that hard left turn, and we're suddenly looking at 12.5 to 13 feet of surge, and I think that caught a lot of people. Certainly, folks who decided to stay home and ignore the evacuation orders, that changed a lot for them because now they found themselves where they didn't have water during Irene, found themselves with water. If you go to the next slide. So, a lot happened, a lot of preparation, a lot of activation, those initial phases of getting things up and running. Obviously, I'm not going to jump into that right now because it could be the focus of a whole nother call. But here's what we got at the end. Just to sum it up, and it's really hard to I guess sum up what you've done for 3.5 months of round-the-clock operations in just an hour. But the data is here: 600 million gallons of water in infrastructure, and that's really that's public sector infrastructure. That's not necessarily factoring in completely the private sector buildings, the high-rise buildings that were inundated with water, had to pump it out. 60,000 homes destroyed. The debris that was generated and the customers without power. It was a magnitude that could have been overwhelming if we hadn't put in place in advance so many of the efforts that we did to prepare and really spent a lot of time thinking about these challenges. And as much time as you spend thinking about the challenges, everyone who's on the call I'm sure knows, there's always going to be something new. There's always going to be something unique that comes up. And a lot of what, as operational as we got in terms of planning and knowing all the details of what we want, we always kept an eye in our planning process and in our planning development of the process. What's the process, so that if something changes, we can just incorporate that into the process and follow that along to the end, wherever it got changed. I do, again, one of the things along those lines that I want to note is that you think about debris and you think about houses destroyed. So the first thing people tend to think of is, okay, so get a front end loader, fill it up, pull it in, get a big container, dump it on the container, and clear the pile. How hard could that be? And the reality is, when you really think about it, and the nuance of the laws that apply in the reality, you're looking at houses. Some houses have been in some of these areas from 1940s, 1950s. They had asbestos in certain parts of the houses. That has to be attended to. That has to be taken care of. You can't just go scoop it up and dump it someplace. Paying attention to the vegetative debris that in some areas we're concerned about the Asian longhorn beetle. In some areas we want to make sure that we want to always make sure that we're recycling the stuff that we can recycle. So again, we wanted to pay attention to all those details and not just lump it all together and try to move on as quickly as possible. So if you go to the next slide, the key to all of this is our Emergency Operations Center. That is essentially the nerve center that ties together the pardon me, the myriad of operations, different simultaneous operations that are going on across the entire city. And it gives us a single location where we can have 150 plus of our closest partners, be it from the federal level, from the state level, and nonprofits, and of course even especially the private sector sitting there with us to help us collect the information that we need, make sure that we're addressing the right needs and getting the right resources where we need them as quickly as possible. And this, I have to say, is probably, and this is what I wanted to focus on just for a couple of minutes, is really highlighting what to us has been an incredibly successful partnership and relationship with a broad array of private sector partners. And we know, from working on the Regional Catastrophic Planning Grant here in the city and in the region, we know that there are a number of models for how public-private partnerships can exist, whether it's an independent business emergency operations center, or it's a single seat representing the private sector. The way we've gone and our approach has been to not limit the interaction of the private sector with us by keeping them in a separate room or by having only one person try to speak for multiple industries. We've decided that we're going to have industry groups sitting with us in the EOC to advocate for and to facilitate the operations of their industry. And it's been we think a resounding success, because for us, it's not about controlling information and handing it out in a way that makes us powerful. We want there to be as much transparency as possible. We want these individual organizations and industries to be as resilient as possible on their own, to leverage the information that they can get from the EOC and to go out and to use that in order to make sure that they have as much access to the information as possible. What you see here is a slide. This is our private sector role within the EOC. We work under emergency support functions in the New York City EOC. So we have, and it doesn't exactly translate to what you would find in NIMS, although for the most part it overlaps. Transportation, public safety, health and medical, human services, infrastructure, utilities, private sector, and regional coordination. And each one of these areas is integrated not just by federal or state or by a tier, but really by function. We want to make sure that everyone's communicating with each other. And here you see, of course, Mayor Bloomberg talking with members of the private sector, ESF, emergency support function team, representing a large number of different organizations. Just to list them, actually, if you go to the next slide. So this is just a few of our partners that are sitting with us in the EOC. And what I tried to do with this slide is really reflect one of the key elements for us in integrating the private sector into the ESF, and that's it's not having this force multiplier effect. So we've gone with organizations who sit in our EOC, SIFMA, the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association, the Hotel Association of New York, the Food Industry Alliance. These are trade organizations that represent hundreds and thousands of individual businesses. And so while we don't have room, certainly in our EOC, to have all of the 200,000 businesses, each send a representative or communicate with us in the EOC, we want to make sure that they have a conduit, that they know who their advocate, who their liaison is in the EOC, and they can turn around and talk to us. Some of the individual companies that you see on here, like Target and Walmart, they don't have seats in our EOC, but we do talk to them. We do incorporate them into conference calls on a regular basis to make sure that we're aligned, given their resources, the resources that they can make available to us during an event. NYU, you see up there, NYU represents the university consortium of the private universities in the city, representing 17 universities, each of which have enrollments that range from 8,000 people up to 40,000. And so it gives us the opportunity with a single message to that consortium to share information with them and to make sure that we're addressing the needs of a potentially vulnerable population. You have students who are in dormitories, students who aren't from the area. We want to make sure that that these universities are empowered to work with them and handle them instead of having them push them into our shelter system. It is a robust and dynamic engagement in the EOC. We brought in to have seated in our EOC 16 different organizations representing the private sector, and every single day for nearly 3.5 weeks, we held a private sector call with 25 different organizations who represented their different industries and their different groups, including Building Owners and Managers Association and the Real Estate Board representing the real estate industry, the consortium of the Hotel Association representing all the hotels in New York City, the Small Business Service that represents small businesses, the New York State Insurance Department representing insurance companies. We had uniquely enough, the Alliance for Response, who was sitting in our EOC with us, and they are a link for us to the cultural institutions in the city. Are hundreds and hundreds of museums and cultural institutions that could find themselves in vulnerable positions, and many did. Many had collections that were severely impacted. We want to make sure that they were tied closely to us in the EOC. Legal administrators representing the, I should insert the appropriate lawyer joke here, but the reality is that in New York City we have a lot of law firms, and it's a pretty big important business base for us in addition to the financial industries, the financial sector. So they represent thousands and thousands of employees and hundreds of businesses. Of course, we have connections, and we incorporate into our private sector ESF. JetBlue, who represented and gave us insight into the airline industry and essentially chaired a airline consortium, providing us information about the connecting us with the various airlines and the activities and their needs. The United Nations, and of course with the New York, the Roadrunners Association. In those first couple of days, you probably remember the challenge and the question about the marathon that was going on. We were talking to them, and it goes beyond just whether or not the marathon should be run or was run or wouldn't be run, but they had significant resources that they had prepared for the storm, for the marathon, including access to many hotel rooms, and so it was a great partnership for us to be able to work with them and incorporate them directly into our calls during that kickoff, and again making sure that not only did we do a call to educate people, but we were turning it. It was a two-way call. We were taking in information. It gives us insight into actions and issues that are going on across the entire city, and that's what's key for us. It's not just about us posting information or deploying information. It's about us being able to collect information and understand what the impacts are across the city. I would. What we talked about on those calls, just to give people a little bit of insight. We were doing daily transportation updates, making sure people understood exactly what the response was looking like, situational awareness. But we were also doing was bringing subject matter experts onto the phone to answer the questions, and this was key for us. We have in the EOC Con Edison representatives. We had Verizon representatives sitting with us, and this was an opportunity for these organizations to get on the phone with private sector industry groups and explain exactly what was happening. weren't acting as the buffer. We didn't try to get involved or translate for anyone. We wanted to make sure they could hear from the subject matter experts, because at the end of the day, what's so important, and this is I guess goes to one of our general beliefs in terms of our public-private partnerships, is that we are doing our best to empower our contacts and the folks who we relate to in the private sector in front of their executives and in front of their C-suite partners. So the ability for someone in the industry group to come back and say, we were on a conference call, we heard from Con Ed, this is what the update is, that empowers them and that enhances their reputation almost in front of the folks in their organization, and we want to make sure that we can support that, because it doesn't need to be us. We want to make sure that everyone is getting the right information from the right people, and we've seen this happen again and again. In Irene, in Sandy, comments coming out. It was very easy for us to, as soon as Con Ed started talking about de-energizing certain zones in advance or in anticipation of the storm coming, these guys were able to get up and communicate that message out to their various industry groups in a timely manner, in a manner that was appropriate to their organization. And I can't stress that enough. We strive to have not just people who are sitting in the EOC, not just people who are sitting in these seats who represent these industries. We're not looking for someone to just take notes and pass along. We're looking for subject matter experts and industry experts who can tell us what the needs are of their group and pull that information out in a format. So if it's the securities industry and they're focused on transportation and power for whether or not the market's going to be open, and we can talk to them about that. That's one way to translate it. For the Building Owners and Managers Association, their experts brought to our attention some questions that we were able to help them answer from DEP. For the life of me, I never would have thought twice about the challenges or the regulations around pumping water out of basements that might have been mixed with something that was sitting, something other than water that might have been in that basement. But these guys were able to raise the question for us so that we could go and get their industry an answer. And instead of having 35,000 different building managers trying to figure out what they're going to do on their own, we were able to help them facilitate a straight answer from Department of Environmental Conservation and Department of Environmental Protection about permitting and about regulatory relief in some areas. And that to us was a big success, because that made the reoccupancy of the buildings that much closer and that much quicker. Part of what we had to talk about, of course, is if you go to the next slide, it's about access, about understanding where people can go and when people can get there. What do different parts mean? Part of the challenge for us is that we try to be advocates for the private sector in the ESF and in the EOC. So we're not sitting there just passing along information, but we're sitting there trying to inform the decision makers at City Hall and in the executive suites of the agencies about the needs that the private sector has in terms of getting access back to their buildings and making sure that they could reoccupy specific areas. We spent a lot of time debating and looking at travel restrictions. At the end of the day, the decision we made, City Hall made, was to implement some HOV restrictions, high occupancy vehicle restrictions into Lower Manhattan. There were no exceptions. It didn't matter how, whether you were a doctor or a nurse, a trader, a $50 million trader for Goldman Sachs. There were no exceptions. And part of that was, part of that challenge was, of course, explaining to people why they weren't allowed in and what the different challenges were, and we were able to do that. And simply, the bottom line for us in Lower Manhattan is, physically, there isn't room for all the people who drive their vehicles into Lower Manhattan if there weren't those restrictions. So, we still need to make sure that we have those resources. If you go to the next slide, I just wanted to take you through a couple of the things that we did and how we sort of engage with the private sector. here you see the inundation areas, the areas covered in blue, the city that experienced water. If you go to the next slide, so there were a lot of different operations that were going on in the course of this event, and I want to credit our logistics team here at OEM for developing a couple of these incredible slides that really pull the picture together for us. But you can see here, each one of those shelters was an independent operation, handling hundreds, if not thousands of people on any given day, with helping them with resources and making sure that they had a comfortable environment. Special medical needs shelters were housing thousands of patients that were displaced from nursing homes in the Rockaways and hospitals in Lower Manhattan. But the communication and our ability to talk to our private sector partners throughout this event helped us make sure that we could get resources where we needed to. One particular example I thought was great. I got a call. We have a very active logistics center operation here, and so it's always an interesting balance between the public-private emergency support function and logistics, because in some locations across the country, the public-private component is really their sourcing, where they're going to turn to get supplies. And we look primarily at our public-private partnership as a resiliency support. We're not necessarily looking for what you can provide. We're looking for you to get back up in business as quickly as possible, so that you can get back to business and doing what you do every single day. And so our logistics folks have contracts, and New York City has requirements contracts for almost anything that you can imagine. But of course, there are emergencies that come up, and we had a special medical needs shelter that lost its ability to wash the towels, and they needed hundreds of towels for the special medical needs patients and that they had in their shelter. And so we were able to turn to our hotel association and say, we need 500 towels as soon as possible. And one quick email, a couple phone calls, and we had a list of pickup sites. We could do one quick round through the city with 15 different hotels, each contributing a nice number of towels, and drop it off, and in the span of a couple of hours, we're able to solve that problem. Again, reaching out to our partnerships and getting it done where we needed to fix it, and that along with those towels came sundries, shampoo and soap, etc., that were distributed to shelters to support operations. So some of our shelterees commented about some of the really fancy bars of soap and shaving kits that they got, that they were really impressed with our ability to distribute fancy supplies. We had to quickly make sure they understood it wasn't going to happen every single time. But ultimately, we were proud of that relationship and how we were able to connect with them. Whether sandbags or electric blankets that our Target partners helped us acquire. We had a sudden need for electric blankets that exceeded pretty much any contractual any vendor that was out there, and we turned to our Target partners, and they were able to support us and modify some of their standard operating procedures in order to make things happen. But again, it's not just about supplies. It's about partnerships and broader resources. And if you go to the next slide, one of the key elements to our engagement post Sandy was making sure that people had the food and water that they needed in areas that were impacted. So we set up some significant food distribution, food truck operations, feeding the public, and you can see all these different locations, and these are not haphazardly placed. It's not done based on political will or favors. We wanted to make sure, pardon me, that we understood exactly what areas needed the needed the resource and how we would be able to provide it to them. And so we leveraged our relationship with the private sector to accomplish that. If you go to the next slide, one of the things that we did pretty quickly, well, I shouldn't say pretty quickly, but it came to us after a few weeks in, and we were starting to provide, we were providing food and water, looking to go to that next level and understand where we're going to establish these long-term feeding operations. We worked with the Restaurant Association as part of our emergency support function, and the Food Industry Alliance as part of our emergency support function, and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, who here in the city is responsible for evaluating and inspecting every food service establishment in the city. And we took the data that they had and we ran it against a couple of lists, looking at the zip codes that were impacted by sandy areas, that were impacted by inundation, and ultimately we took that list of a couple thousand food service establishments and put it and use the service that we have. SendWord now is the one we use, the auto dialer. We created a message. We created a simple message that basically said, we're trying to collect data about commodity and food distribution in impacted areas. Press 1 if you're open, 2 if you're open with limited service. You can see on the screen here, or 4 if you're closed. And did that auto dialer, and in the span of a couple of what turned out to be roughly 30 minutes, we were able to collect a significant amount of data, things that we had talked about, maybe getting people to go door to door. How do we understand what's open, what's closed, where do we need to put our resources? And we were able to really get an idea. You can see from this particular map, some areas had green. We knew that those had great access. We didn't need to go set up a food site in that area to compete with the businesses that had managed to recover and get reopened. But other areas where we knew there were thousands, there were hundreds of businesses and restaurants that should have been answering and weren't answering or answered in the negative. We knew that we had some challenges. You can look at Far Rockaway over there. The Rockaway's in the bottom right, and really see that there was a significant gap in stores that were even able to provide resource information back to us. And some of that, of course, it goes is impacted infrastructure, and some of that is sort of outliers. But at the end of the day, it gave us an idea of where to start. And we ran it a couple times and ultimately followed up. Of course, one of the lessons learned through this whole thing, and it sort of dawned on me as we were going into our third round of this, is that I typically hang up when I get an auto dial at home. When I answer the phone and I hear someone, some robotic voice, and so we paid particular attention to that need and that concern that people might just be hanging up because they didn't want to get a robocall, and we transitioned to a call center with our department of taxation. Although the New York State Department of Finance, the taxation call center, we made sure that they didn't call up and lead with the hi, we're calling about taxes. But it was important for us to have that personal outreach. We got some additional information, and again, that helps us make the decision and helps us really guide how we're going to go about giving answers. If you go to the next slide, just a quick word jumble. The larger the word, the more often it was requested and needed through our logistics center, through our private sector partners. Fuel, blankets, porta potties. That's a key one, and of course generators and light towers. But all through there were and I'll go through a couple slides just to give a perspective of what was out there. And in every single situation, we were trying to work with our private sector partners to support them, and not only support them, but to integrate their resources. There were a lot of organizations that were up and operational and were seeking to find just that pathway, that single pathway, in order to support the public sector, and in order to support the folks who were impacted in the right way. And if you go to the next slide, some of the things that we went through, just to throw up a little bit of data. 2,600 requests for more than 1.6 million individual items. I mean, there were requests that were coming for things of all shapes and sizes. Our logistics center was working around the clock for a couple months, just trying to process all those needs. If you go to the next slide, I put this slide about our logistics staging area in there because I wanted to highlight, something that we're really proud of in terms of our engagement with the private sector, and that's our relationship with the New York City Mets. As all of you can imagine, we are at a premium here in New York City for flat, open space. It's and I should say, the couple of parking lots here and there in Manhattan aren't ideal for setting up a staging area, bringing in resources, and really moving it around in an efficient way. The Mets organization, the New City Field, they have great parking lots out there, and when we approach them about the opportunity to partner with them and plan in advance for leveraging their resources, they welcomed us with open arms. They wanted to be a partner with us, and again, this was a way for us to reflect our idea in public-private partnerships that it's not about an organization providing material or donating material or writing us a check. That comes across in many parts of the country or many other operations where people act as though that's the purpose of having a public-private partnership. For us, we want to leverage. We want to try to leverage some of those resources. We're not against getting a check. So anyone who's on the phone who wants to send us a check, don't take that to mean we don't want it. But the reality is we're not going out and asking for it. We're going out and looking for ways that we can leverage experience and leverage knowledge and leverage those partnerships to fundamentally build a response and execute a response and recovery. I mean, of course, it helps that. No, I shouldn't say it helps, but it's unfortunate that the Mets weren't playing into October, so they knew that they would have the space and they weren't going to be playing any playoff games. But looks pretty bright with Matt Harvey on the mound, so I think the Mets might not have their parking lots available that much longer. If you go to the next slide. Our restoration centers, this is another example of how on the fly we modified some of our existing plans. We had a very robust disaster assistance service center plan, and we modified that into what we called restoration centers for 30,000 people served, 17,000 enrolled. Small businesses being able to walk into these centers and get the services that they need, have access to Con Ed representation and Verizon, and get access to all the supplies and all the support that they need. But it's about also making sure that we have those resources. If you go to the next slide, again, going back to that mass feeding, it was a big operation, but we always had to do it in the context of how do we make sure that we're not hurting the small businesses and the restaurants that are getting back up and running. There was constant attention paid to the fact that we did not want to stymie any recovery that was going on their part. We wanted to make sure people had the resources. And as soon as we found out, as soon as we realized that construction workers were bypassing the open subway shop to go get the free lunch, down the block, we shut down that distribution site because if it's available. We're all about people who need the resource getting it, but not at the expense necessarily of the businesses that are trying to make that comeback. If you go to the next slide, again, some of you might have recalled. I throw this in because it was one of the larger challenges that we faced at Breezy Point with a significant fire the night the storm hit that destroyed a significant number of homes in a relatively small community, and recovery from that has been challenging for them, and we're continuing to support them on a regular basis. I have two more slides that I want to just throw up there, and it talks about it talks a little bit to some of what we looked at after the storm, and not only private sector, but and I think a lot of this is reflective of folks in the private sector. But the question you see here: 71% of the New Yorkers surveyed heard the evacuation announcement. And if you move to the next slide, you'll see that only 29% of those, actually decided, who were in Zone A, decided to evacuate. And part of that is understanding. Part of our challenge is understanding why people make decisions, the decisions that they do, so we can modify our plans and we can incorporate change and address them. And if you go to the next slide, I click it one more time. Yeah, there we go. The here's essentially that breakdown of why people decided not to evacuate. And everyone has an excuse and everyone has a reason. And part of our approach, we're doing something similar with our private sector partners through our Partners in Preparedness program and trying to understand the decision points. But our approach in the private sector is to ask these questions and then build a solution that's going to prevent it from occurring in the future. So we want to make sure that if people, if someone in the private sector, someone a small business said they didn't know that they were in an evacuation zone, we don't want that to be an excuse going forward. We want to make sure that we communicate with them as quickly as possible in advance. We want to make sure we share this information. If people had issues, they didn't have any transportation or had medical issues, our approach now is to really make sure that we address these concerns in advance and set folks up for a positive experience going forward. And with that, I think we have. I think that is my last slide. Here's the last slide. The damage was significant. The work that we did with the private sector was fundamentally the execution of a lot of years of planning, of collaboration, of understanding, and relationship building. It's not something I think that you could just flip on and figure out how to do during an event. It takes an investment well in advance of the storm, well in advance of the 2 days or 3 days of notice that you're going to have. But building those bridges and building those relationships is something that is going to ultimately lead you to be able to handle any situation and follow and modify your response and your approach to any emergency. There are certainly a number of challenges and issues that we worked on that I didn't get a chance to discuss. I hope they come out during the Q&A session. But thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about our experience and talk about how we engaged the private sector after Sandy, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Ira. So now's your chance to ask any questions you want of Ira. And as a reminder, there's 2 ways to participate in this part of the webinar. You can click on the hand icon on your window panel, which will signal us that you want your phone unmuted, or you can just type in your question to us, and we'll read them out to Ira. But Ira, we do have a couple questions here so far. One of them is, do you have any plans or efforts in place to streamline and provide toll waivers so out-of-state volunteers can respond without those types of fees?
Which waivers?
Tolls, for the tolls coming into the city.
So, the question of volunteer and donations management is something that we pay particular attention to. I haven't heard of that challenge of the tolls being a barrier to access, but certainly it's something that we're happy to work with our organizations and here to make sure that we can support them. So the key for us is for anyone with a challenge to be able to access the EOC through their right conduit. And I can tell you that when we had challenges for people coming into the city, if it was someone from an organization that was supporting the infrastructure or utilities, that came up to the utility emergency support function right over to the public safety or the transportation desk, and working together in the OC with our transportation agencies, we're able to solve pretty much any problem as soon as it got to our bridges or tunnels.
Great, thank you. And Ira, you talked a bit about how you communicated and worked closely with the private sector. Can you speak to how you coordinated with the federal government?
Sure. So the federal government is a partner with us on many levels, and in some ways, for some of our operations, we see them primarily as a vendor. Right? They're a source. If we have a resource that we need, we could potentially go to them and identify that resource. But the key for us is understanding what they bring to the table and having that relationship in advance. So we sit down with our federal partners and understand how they would tie in or could tie in, but ultimately having the right representatives, both from FEMA and especially in this particular case, HHS, Health and Human Services, really supported us with the healthcare facility evacuation and making resources available, so that we can convert shelters and some buildings that we had available to us into temporary locations.
I just want to jump in here. This is Dina, and just say that we work with the federal government, our federal partners, every day in planning and preparedness. This is they're integrated member of all of our planning teams. But I think what was interesting with Sandy is that our federal partners helped us get some innovations done that were never done before, and that was primarily because they were sitting with us at the most senior levels with us on our task forces and making critical decisions with us to allow us to use funding and to, for example, I'm sorry, we had a problem with the bridge, but we provided U.S. Army Corps generators to private sector buildings. This is not normally done, but if we were to evacuate one of our high-rise buildings with several thousand people and have to take them into either sheltering or hotels, that would have been an overwhelming pressure on the city. And our federal partners understood that and waived that requirement. They changed the rules for us on the fly. And we did the same with some of our dewatering operations and so forth, and our housing operations. So yes, we work very closely with them, and this has been a unique Sandy has been a unique opportunity where we've actually done new things, new ways of doing business.
Thank you, Dina and Ira. Here's another question that we have. How did catastrophic planning grant efforts assist you in responding to Sandy?
I think I'll give you one simple example. They helped us across many of our ESFs, but I'll give you a simple example. As the storm was coming, our EOC was fully packed with all of our agency partners, and our concern was elevated around populations with special needs. And what we did was, and this is the first time we activated that particular task force, we pulled out of our regional sheltering plan the special needs task force. We have our plan is set up like almost a workbook. It's very action-oriented. So we just pulled out the relevant pages. I turned them over to our commissioner of the mayor's office with people with disabilities, assigned an OEMer to the team, and asked them to start working those issues so that we can address and be in front of special needs issues. And one of the things that we did, which was never done before, is through that special needs task force, we were able to secure an interpreter that was on all of the mayor's briefings. And you've probably seen those interpreters and maybe seen slides of them, very animated, very interesting, which was a first for us. And as a matter of fact, it was pointed out to me later that even when President Obama had its press conferences, there were no interpreters there, so it was quite a contrast. And we were very pleased to institute that. So this was an example of using a tool that was created with regional catastrophic planning grant funds that was specifically used in Sandy.
Okay, Dina, and there was also a question here about how you coordinated with the state of New York, and same caller also wanted to know how you may have coordinated with New Jersey and the New Jersey private sector, especially for critical resources such as fuel.
So I'll say, listen, we have a section of our EOC that's dedicated to regional coordination. So we had representatives from New York State sitting with us as a conduit, as a link to the State Emergency Operations Center, making sure that all the requests that we were making through the state were processed appropriately and giving us insight into the resources and capabilities that they brought to bear. And the same goes for FEMA. We typically have a seat available for Nassau, New Jersey, and in this particular event, everyone was pretty wrapped up. The reality is that we dealt very closely with New Jersey, the New Jersey EOC to pass along any and their private sector desk any issues that came that impacted both New York City and New Jersey.
I just want to mention here that in terms of our state partners being integrated with us, we had a call with the senior leadership from the state. So Commissioner Howard was on the phone with us, and Tony Sutton pretty much every day. I think it was a 5 o'clock call with our commissioner and our first deputy and the team members, just dealing with and making sure all of our issues were addressed, and pretty much we had tremendous support from the state.
Yeah, I just want to add, I know we're running out of time, but I do want to, identify a particular scenario that came up, and that was one of our private sector partners that we work with on a regular basis from the food industry side. White Rose is based in New Jersey, and they supply thousands of stores here in New York City, and in New York, I mean, we have a limitation, a just-in-time delivery system where our stores need to be replenished, every couple of days, and so we got a call from White Rose that their generators had been impacted, and they needed support and resources. Otherwise, they would be significantly impaired. And part of that challenge is where do we get that resource from? We know that downstream and them suspending service would eventually lead to bare shelves in New York City. But could we take and divert a resource and a priority resource in the city? Ultimately, we were able to pair them up with New Jersey, and they had already spoken to part of those conversations. But we all worked together to make sure that they got the resources that they need, because so many different operations go on outside our city boundaries, but ultimately to support our operations here in the city.
And I would like to say there was one gap, I guess you could call it that. We have built a regional emergency conference call process that any member of our regional catastrophic planning team in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania can request a conference call with the senior leaders. We did not use that effectively, as effectively as we could have. So although we were talking with our partners, we did not convene, New York did not request to convene this regional emergency conference call, and I don't believe any of our other partners did either, which we would have certainly participated if it had been requested. I think we missed some opportunities there, particularly we could have possibly gotten ahead of the gas crisis by learning, New Jersey's operation, which was the odd-even numbers. That would have helped us. Perhaps we would have implemented that strategy a little bit earlier had we had that conference call. So, yeah, there a lot of things worked well, and I think there were some smaller gaps.
Opportunities for
that we missed. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question here. Were federal credentialing efforts at the Disaster Recovery Center helpful for your recovery efforts?
So say that again?
Were federal credentialing efforts at the Disaster Recovery Center helpful in the recovery efforts?
What credentialing
Well,
efforts?
if the question is whether resources with PIV-I cards, whether that made a difference in integrating them into the operation, I would say off the top of my head that no, that we weren't looking, we did not look for those, use those as as credentials to determine someone's access or support. We worked with a lot of organizations who identified who were responsible for their staff that they were bringing, but we weren't looking at, to my knowledge, those credentials as access qualifiers.
Thank you. We had a question on our webinar yesterday with New Jersey that I think is worth repeating. But Ira, Dina, what advice do you have for private sector and state and local government going forward in their own preparation efforts?
Talk now. I would say that's the key. And it's sort of the old cliche in emergency management. Don't exchange business cards during an emergency. But it goes without saying that that almost everything that happens in the course of an emergency happens at a quick pace, and you really end up engaging more freely with partners who've been established and relationships that exist, and rather than ones that just come out of the blue. It's much harder to get integrated from nowhere during an emergency.
Yeah, and we're not talking here about people knowing Ira specifically or Dina specifically. We're talking about establishing a track, a process through which that communication flow.
Yeah, I think I want to second that's so critical. It's about making these relationships institutional. It's about ensuring that there's a private sector emergency support function that will happen whether Ira is here or not, and it's hard for people to do that, but it's incredibly important as an organization that some of these partnerships might start off as based on personal relationships, but you have to find a way to institutionalize those so they go beyond just that individual or those two individuals.
No, sure. That's fantastic advice. I appreciate that so much. And I wanted to, on behalf of the All Hazards Consortium, thank you, Dina, and thank you, Ira, as well as your team at the New York City OEM for putting together this webinar for our audience and providing us with this information. And I wanted to remind the audience, too, that we will be following up with you with a copy of or a link to this webinar so you can forward on to others who you think would be interested in listening to this. And hope you guys get some relief up there in New York. We just got a 5-minute downpour in Montgomery County, Maryland, so hopefully that's coming your way too. But I wish you the best with the heat wave, and thank you again, and look forward to having you in a future webinar. And this ends today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much.